Hello, everyone. Welcome to Queer Book Talks with Lily and Olivia. And this is a special video podcast for Pride Month. And we're going to be talking about queer books that we liked and that we would love to recommend to all of you. And yeah, we're going to talk about two books of our choosing, and we'll go from there. So I will let them introduce themselves, but I'll start with myself. My name is Alfonso Mateo. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I work here at CCTV as their programming and events manager.
Hi, I'm Lily. I'm use she, her, hers, and I'm one of the assistant managers at Harvard Bookstore.
I'm Olivia. I also go by Liv, sort of interchangeably. She, they. I'm a supervisor at Harvard Bookstore. I do things for Publishers Weekly occasionally, and I am a 2022 Lambda Literary Fellow.
Nice. Well, first of all, thank you for accepting my invitation here at CCTV and doing this Queer Book Talks for Pride Month. And I can't wait to talk about the books that we chose. So let's jump into it. So let's show and tell our book choices. Who wants to go first?
Everyone's looking at me, so I guess I'll go first. Sure. So both of my books came out last year. The first one is a middle grade book. It's Too Bright to See by Kyle Lukoff, maybe. It is about a trans boy. It's a spoiler, but it's also in the description. He doesn't know he's trans until the end. It's like a trans ghost story. I love it. And my other one is Last Night at the Telegraph Club by Melinda Lowe, which is historical fiction. It takes place in San Francisco's Chinatown neighborhood in the 1950s during the Red Scare.
Melinda Lowe's also local, isn't she?
She is.
Nice.
Yeah.
Oh, local from Massachusetts?
Yeah, the Boston area, I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
She stops by Porter Square Books sometimes to sign.
Yeah, and
my
she's
God.
stopped in occasionally at Harvard as well to sign. And I saw her speak at the Cambridge Public Library the other day.
Yeah. First time she came to the store, I didn't recognize her until Olivia pointed her out, and I just yelled to her face, "Congratulations!" And then I had to.
Yeah, we both kind of like
immediately leave.
Yeah.
Oh my God. No, but those books sound very fascinating. I can't wait to hear more about it. What about you, Lily?
All right. So mine's also fairly recent. First one is Iron Widow by Shiran J. Zhao. You probably have heard this all over TikTok. The author uses they, she, I think. But they are wildly popular on Twitter and TikTok for the way that they dress and their very Gen Z personality online. So this one blew up. And then the other one is older, and it's a nonfiction book. Iron Widow is YA. But I brought The Invisible Orientation by Julie Sandra Decker. Older book, but it's also one of the foundational books on asexuality.
Is it fiction or
Nonfiction.
It
kind of reads
gotcha.
like a big 101 pamphlet.
Got it. The cover for The Iron Widow is a killer.
It's so good. It's so eye-catching. It's one of those that, if you unfold it, it all makes one big
the back of it
picture.
is really cool,
that
too.
looks really
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
And is it Asian characters?
Yeah,
Or-
it's based on... So it takes place in, futuristic sci-fi Earth-ish,
Yeah.
but it's based on in Chinese, the first, and I think only, Chinese empress.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. Nice.
Yeah.
Well, the books that I chose, the first one is On Earth, We're Briefly Gorgeous by Ocean Vuong, who is queer himself. And it's a coming-of-age drama that is set in Connecticut, here in the East Coast. So it's extra relatable for us East Coasters. But it's coming of age, but he also, throughout the story, he has a sexual awakening with his friend. It's a little it's a little problematic the way he discovered his sexuality because of his kind of manipulative friend. But that's what I liked about it. It was very real and very relatable for a lot of folks. But yeah, it's very gritty in a way, and it's very honest about it. And then the other one is My Policeman by Bethan Roberts. I don't know a lot about the author, but I chose this because Harry Styles is playing the lead, Tom. But I totally love this book because it shows the perspectives, the POVs of all three main characters, and they all have a chapter for each of them. And then you can totally see the perspective of Tom, who is the closeted gay man, Patrick, who is, the open gay man, and then I forgot her name. And then the woman who is married to Tom, and then we see everyone's perspective and about the situation. And I should Sylvie is her name. Sylvie.
Which one's Harry playing?
Harry's playing Tom, the closeted gay man. And it's a really tragic story. Doesn't really have a happy ending, but sorry, spoiler alert. But yeah, it's very tragic, which is also another reality back in the 50s because it's set in the 50s. And it's really, they're, back then they were prosecuting queer people. And that was basically the main plot of the novel.
Yeah, so yours are set about 10 years apart, but I mean, last night at Telegraph Club also doesn't have necessarily a happy. It has an okay ending.
When is it set?
It probably has the exact year in it. 1954.
Gotcha.
Oh, okay.
It has, I don't know. I don't want to spoil it, but maybe about as happy of an ending given the circumstances.
Yeah,
and there is a sequel coming out in October as well. It's a companion. It takes place in 2013, but you do get some closure on this. So.
Yeah.
So what's the genre of Last Night at the Telegraph?
It's young adult. So it's young adult historical fiction. I do think that even more than other young adult books, it has a lot of crossover appeal with adult readers. It reads very much like The Price of Salt, which is the book they turned into Carol.
I see.
And which I noticed while reading it, and then in her author's note, she says that was one of her inspirations. It very much reads like it was written in the 1950s.
Yep.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, my first question is, I guess we can expand on what we liked about our book choices. Who would like to go first?
I mean, I can.
Okay,
Quit all looking at Olivia. So I'll start with Iron Widow because it's sitting on top. I liked it because it is very queer, but it's not necessarily a queer book. The themes of Iron Widow are mostly taking down the patriarchy, literally setting it on fire using giant mechanical monsters. And then the queerness is just kind of inherent in that. And also two of the characters are bi/pan. Shiran talks a lot, I think on Twitter, about how they don't like the love triangle. They think it's kind of stupid how one character has to pick two people. So they wrote a fully poly love triangle. So all three of them are in a spoiler alert, but also they tweet about this all the time. But Iron Widow's poly, and it's the two male love interests who kind of realize that we also like each other as well as also we like the girls. So I think there's so much happening in this and it's very good, but I don't think a lot of people really focus or highlight the queer aspects of it, which is also just as groundbreakings might be a lot, but just as important as a theme as the taking down the patriarchy parts. And then I chose invisible orientation just because it's one of those things of asexuality is starting to become more talked about in mainstream. especially on TikTok, as people are figuring it out. And a lot of people will reference this book of like, if you have any questions or if you want to know like
I see.
where I did my research, a lot of it starts here. So I wanted to highlight that. Like, yeah, it is. I've read it cover to cover.
Right.
It is nonfiction, but it's not heavily academic. It's very accessible. It kind of reads like a self-help book. And I thought it was very helpful and very good when I was starting to figure that out.
Mm-hmm. Well, so the Iron Widow, it's not like the main plot. It's not focused on sexuality.
Yeah.
And it's really about something else, but the characters happen to be.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Which I like because it's just one of those things of like, there's a large cast of characters, and the idea of all of these characters being straight is kind of ridiculous.
Yeah.
And it's just the way it works, it fits in with the characters who they are naturally.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's just refreshing to read or even watch movies that are about something else, but then they just happen to be queer too.
Yeah.
But they're not focusing on the queer aspect because I feel they're just trying to normalize it, and not trying to make a big deal about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's nice. That's nice. Well, I can go about my books. So what I liked about On Earth Were Briefly Gorgeous, it was very Asian in a way where the son and the mother and the grandmother, they were all immigrants from Vietnam, and then they moved to, this very American town in Connecticut, very white. They were the only Asians there. And, he was trying to fit in with the white crowd. And then he wasn't really fitting in. So he started working at this farm. And then he meets this guy, same age. His name is Trevor. And then they just throughout the story, they just started, becoming close friends. And they started... Spoiler alert. I'm going to put a huge spoiler alert in the beginning of this video podcast. And then, they started becoming very close. They started kind of experimenting with things. And then there comes a point where the experiment has gone too far between them two. But then also the main character, Little Dog, he also kind of falls for Trevor by the end of the story. But then it has a tragic ending, so I'm not going to talk about that. But yeah, I liked how... This sounds like really dark, but I love reading stories that aren't necessarily like happy and like... it just kind of reflects a lot of people's reality. And how, the loss of innocence at a very early age happens a lot. And they did talk about that in the book and how that loss of innocence affects the character throughout their life. But it also discusses, domestic abuse at home, which also affects your, psychic and your trauma. And that's what I liked about it. It's dark, but it's there's uplifting tones within the story. And then for My Policeman, what I liked about it, I briefly talked about it, but the perspectives of Sylvie, of Tom, and of Patrick, you can, especially reading Tom's perspective and Patrick's perspective, you really... you kind of feel the butterflies that Patrick has for Tom. And Sylvie and Patrick are basically obsessed with Tom. And Tom is clearly queer and leaning towards Patrick. But because of the societal pressure, and he's a policeman, I forgot to mention that. He's a policeman back in the 50s. So you can imagine the pressure that's put on him. And because of that pressure, he marries Sylvie. But as you can imagine, it's a miserable marriage because he's not really happy with her. And you can tell through Sylvie's perspective and how she's kind of neglected by Tom and how she's craving for his affection, which she really doesn't receive. And then she starts questioning Tom's friendship with Patrick, because they would go on these travels to Italy, just Tom and Patrick themselves. But she's very in denial, and they're like, oh no, they're just friends, you know. Patrick is like on the richer side, so he has a lot of money. And he's also like 10 years older than Tom. So he's like a sugar daddy, but not really. But yeah, I love how you can see Patrick's perspective and Sylvie's perspective about Tom and how obsessed they are. And as a reader, it makes you kind of really fall for Tom too, because you're basically looking through Patrick's perspective. And, you know, as a gay man, like, it's the tension, the sexual tension between the characters, and the sexual awakening on Tom's side. It's a very exciting book, but at the same time, it's also, you really sympathize with Tom and Patrick and even Sylvie, because it's not really, you know, it wasn't her fault to have that kind of life, and she kind of just fell victim to the societal pressure as a whole. So, yeah.
Nice. We did the launch event for On Earth. The store
did
the
really?
launch event for On Earth or Briefly Gorgeous.
Was Ocean?
Yeah,
there?
it was there. It was one of I don't know where it is, but someone recorded it, and it is amazing wherever that ended up, because he's like eloquent, wonderful speaker. Yeah. The store was packed. Everyone was there, and it was really nice.
Yeah, because he started off as a poet, I believe, and reading On Earth or Briefly Gorgeous, it's very poetic. Yeah. Like, at first I struggled a little bit with like the first few chapters, because it was very metaphorical, and it's like something that you need to analyze, like, what does it mean by this? But then throughout, as you keep reading, it becomes easier, because you just learn his flow, you learn his writing style, you learn what his voice is. It's very poetic.
Yeah.
So, and it's a good read.
I definitely felt the same way when I first started that one. I definitely felt like too dumb to get it.
Yes,
and it took a while to get into it.
Yeah. Totally feel the same way. What about you, Liv?
So Too Bright to See is, like I said, it's a ghost story. It's about a trans boy who does not yet realize he's a trans boy, who lives in this old house, and his uncle, who he was very close to, who was an out gay drag queen, has just died, and the house is now haunted by his uncle. I think that's technically another spoiler, because he doesn't figure it out later, but like, it's obviously his uncle who just died. And he is like being haunted, and he doesn't know why, and it's because the ghost of his uncle knows that he's a boy and is like trying to show him. And it has these like really creepy scenes where basically, when he'll experience dysphoria without knowing what it is, that's when the haunting like sort of gets really stronger and like kind of scary. And I love that metaphor as that sort of, you know, being forced into these a social role that you don't yet know you don't belong in. Like, that's a kind of haunting. I think that's really cool. It's just sort of unlike any other middle grade book out there right now. There have been lately a lot more middle grade books featuring trans characters, which is great. But this was the first one I had read that wasn't sort of just straightforwardly, here's this kid, they're trans, they're struggling with bigotry. It really like uses sort of a ghost story framework to do that in a really interesting way. It got a Newbery honor, and I think I'm almost positive it's the first book with a trans character to get a Newbery nod. Yeah, when they did that announcement, both of these got awards, and I was like sitting in the children's section watching it on my laptop and like howling, like my my coworkers thought I was wounded because I was like crying.
I'm definitely buying that book.
It's really
amazing.
good. And then last night at the Telegraph Club, Melinda Lowe has been writing for, I don't know, probably 15 years around there now. And I've been reading her books pretty much her whole career. Her first book, Ash, is a lesbian telling of Cinderella, which I think you find a lot of that kind of thing, especially in YA now, but she was really kind of at the forefront of it, and it's still kind of considered like a modern classic. And it was the first gay book that I like bought for myself, knowing it was gay. So it's very important to me, and it was really great to see her finally get, like, she's always been, I think, very well loved because she's a really good writer, but this also won a bunch of awards and got like these rave reviews, and it's been really nice to see that. And this is her first historical fiction. Like I said, it reads a lot like Price of Salt, which is another book that's important to me, and I think important to a lot of lesbians and women who love women. But the thing about Price of Salt is that it's not diverse at all. It's about white lesbians, which doesn't mean it doesn't also resonate with people of color. Obviously, Melinda Lowe, it resonated with her. But Patricia Highsmith, especially later in her life, was a racist, just sort of openly racist. Yeah, it's a bummer. So this is like the same kind of book about a sort of like gay sexual awakening in a time when that really was not okay at all. But it's from the point of view of a Chinese American girl, and it's during the Red Scare. So it's not just sort of the sexuality aspect of it. It intersects with anti-Asian racism, and they aren't like two separate spheres of her life, right? Like they really intersect. And it's just, the writing is great. The moments as she's like realizing these little things that sort of set her apart from like how girls are supposed to be are just really resonate, even though it takes place in a different time period. You're really like immersed in the gay culture, lesbian culture specifically, of that time period. The Telegraph Club is it wasn't a real club, but was, I think, based off of one, and it is a club where male impersonators, so what we would call drag kings now, perform, and where she sort of finds this lesbian community. And yeah, I just think it's fantastic.
It was really good.
Yeah.
Sounds amazing. Because it's frustrating because I've never, I think, seen or read like an Asian character that is set in the 50s or 60s. Like, we're so sidelined when it comes to those time periods. So I'm happy to hear that last night at the Telegraph Club is about an Asian American girl. It's set in the 50s. Yeah. Like, that's awesome.
And yeah, you're right. It's the Red Scare and her lesbian awakening happening at the same time. It's not like you have to choose. Like, you can either only be Chinese or you're a lesbian. You can't, like, you can have both marginalizations. You have to choose. Yeah.
And they intersect because her dad is being threatened with deportation for allegedly, he's a doctor, and he treated somebody who is allegedly a communist, and that is enough to make him like un-American. So her being seen as un-American also like kind of further puts her family in danger. So they're very much like two like intertwined parts of her life.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, I love how we all brought books that are really diverse in terms of like genre and like topic. Because I don't think I've ever even heard someone talk about asexuality.
Yeah.
But you bringing that book is like a good thing for the viewers to know, because I feel like it's not yet talked about by a lot of people.
Yeah,
but
for
it's
sure.
becoming.
It's becoming more. I've seen more books happening now, and I know that like Heartstopper, I think, is going to really help because Osman.
I don't know how to pronounce it.
I don't remember. But she.
Is it the Netflix series?
Yeah, the Netflix series. The author of that graphic novels series just came out with her a new YA book, and I think Alice Osman is Ace. And her new book involves an ace character. So, like, we're starting to see more of that. It is still targeted toward YA. So hopefully that will start expanding outside other genres. I've seen other nonfiction books and things like that. But, Invisible Orientation is one of the first go-tos that people will recommend.
Nice. Well, thank you for bringing that book. And then the next question is... I mean, some of us talked about this already, but does it accurately reflect the reality for the LGBTQ community? Like the plot or the story itself?
Ish, I would say. So, Invisible Orientation does, because even though it was written in the, like, I'm going to say early thousands, and it's going to be like 2010 or something. 2014.
Wow.
So, oops. So even though it's still accurate, because now as people are talking about it, the book discusses a lot of the questions of like what it means to tell someone what asexuality is for the first time. So that one is still pretty accurate. And then Iron Widow is a little bit, again, because the focus of the novel is more on the ways that women... And even though Shiran Zhao is non-binary, the main character is cis women, or a cis woman. So it focuses a lot on the misogyny of that culture. And then the queerness is just there. One of the boys is like wildly rich. So it's kind of implied that like his status and his monetary privilege... Yeah. It's one of those of like, oh, of course he likes all genders. That's just a frivolous fancy boy thing.
Right.
So the queerness is just kind of there and not really acknowledged, not prejudiced against, not accepted. It's just there.
I see.
Yeah.
Well, I think for my Policeman, for something that's set in the 1950s, I think it does accurately reflect it. Because I did search it up after reading the book, and it was actually, especially in the UK, a lot of people had to really hide their sexual orientation and kind of like gather in like these underground clubs just to like be with a safe community. So back then it does accurately reflect their reality, but I think for today, it still happens in a lot of places. As queer people still doesn't have rights in countries like just the Philippines. Like we don't have rights over there. Even though we can be open, we still don't have. The law is still not on our side.
Right.
So it does still reflect some people's reality in some countries, but it's a little better now.
Right.
With Pride stuff and like a lot of people, the community, getting together. So there is some sort of improvement from, comparing to how it was back in the 50s to now. And then for On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous, I think it does reflect the reality pretty accurately for queer Asian immigrants. It's a very specific demographic. And it's set in, a white town where I also was. Well, it's not really a predominantly white town, but, it's the suburbs off of Massachusetts, off of Boston. And it was very relatable in a way where just, you're curious at a young age, and that's how you start figuring out, like, who you really are, what you're interested in. So in that aspect of the book, it does reflect at least my reality as a queer person. Yeah, and I believe like a lot of queer Asian immigrants too would relate to the book. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think both of these are accurate. I mean, Too Bright to See is very much just sort of, it's about one character. It's a little less sweeping than like Last Night at the Telegraph Club, which was also about a community. But I know that horror and like spooky things really resonate with like a lot of people, like LGBT people, and especially in my experience with trans people. A lot of my trans people are really big horror fans.
A lot of my trans people.
Your specific.
Yeah.
Because I am a horror geek. Like, and even my gay best friend, like we love horror.
Yeah.
Like that's like our comfort movie.
Yeah, I think that's the case with a lot of people, and it is to some extent for me too. I'm a little more sensitive to like gore, but things like this that are like more gothic and like spooky ghost things, I am very into. And I think it's, you know, is something to do with it's already kind of a horror story that you're living sometimes. And also like you I don't know, I think we tend to identify with things that are like you know, supernatural because they're also outside of like a binary, you know. So the use of that sort of genre as a framework, I think really resonates and was a really good and interesting choice. At the end, after he's like come out, there's it kind of like walks through all of the stuff that he and his mother, who's supportive, are doing like at his school, you know, changing his name. He goes and he shops for new clothes. And I think that also is a really good representation of sort of, especially for kids, like here are the things you can do to sort of live how you want to, or for parents, you know, to protect your kid and encourage them. And then Last Night at the Telegraph Club, like I said, the moments where she's sort of realizing her sexuality really resonate. But she also, for the historical community, did like a tremendous amount of research. She had to really go out of her way to research specifically Asian Americans in the lesbian community, because like you said, it's in that time period, they were there. Yep. It's just they aren't written about a lot. So I think it's a really accurate portrayal of that community in the 1950s. Yeah, it's great. I just really love this book. I think, like I said, it's also really refreshing to see something that's more diverse, because a lot of the books that we know of and are considered classics for, you know, for good reason, are also, a lot of them, very white and don't even kind of acknowledge that there are gay people who aren't white. So to see a more inclusive sort of portrait of that, I think is, I'm not like an expert on 1950s gay culture, but it seems very accurate to me. And like I said, I went to a talk she gave, and she talked about like the research she did, and, you know, showed all these pictures and the books she read, stuff like that. So it definitely feels like a very accurate portrayal to me of that time period. It
sounds like it's really grounded in a lot of factual like experiences.
At the end of the book, she has like I don't know, would you call it an appendix? She put all of her like research notes and like some facts about what she had to look into. Author's note.
Yeah, her author's note. Yeah, it's like fairly substantial. She really like goes into it and goes into like the terms that she used because it's told in this like close third person, so it doesn't really editorialize, you know, it calls people what they would have been called back then, so like male impersonators other than drag kings, or, you know, maybe some of them even would have, if they were alive today, identified as trans men or non-binary, you know, but it's still, you still like recognize those people even though the terms they're using are different.
I see. Nice. Well, now we can talk about, if there are any like LGBTQ stereotypes present in these books. I don't really know what I meant by that question, but when I was looking up like LGBTQ stereotypes just in general, it's usually, you know, kind of like TV shows and movies always depicting like the gay best friend or very effeminate men, very flamboyant men. And it's like always like that, especially with TV shows back then. It's like that's the only character that we played. So I was wondering if there were any stereotypes present in these books. I mean, I guess I can say in My Policeman, well, maybe it's valid because it's set in the 50s. But there was this very minor supporting character to Patrick, and he was portrayed as like very flamboyant, always pretty much naked, and have this like man over his house who is paid, and that's like the only way that they kind of get love back then, by paying men and like being secretive, but also being like this out like flamboyant character. But I think they did that in the book because it shows Patrick's perspective about how that's not what he wants to do with his life. Like when when he wants to settle down, he doesn't want to just mess around with men who he needs to pay just to be loved. So I think there was a point to put in that stereotype in the book. Now that I'm talking out loud and like realizing that it does have a point, and not just a random stereotype. But I was just curious if that was a case for your books too.
I mean, I think Too Bright to See really goes out of its way to like avoid stereotypes and be like, gender is not the same as like the clothes you wear. Like at the end when he's shopping for clothes, he buys a pink shirt and he says like, I used to hate the color pink, but now that I am wearing it like as a boy, I like it. And he says like, you know, maybe I'll be the kind of boy who wears makeup. I don't know yet, because like his uncle was, he knows that. He knows that men can present themselves in a feminine way, and that's a part I really liked about it as well. Last night at the Telegraph Club, I mean, there's definitely a character who is a performer with like a male persona, who has this kind of like butch swagger that, I mean, that didn't read as incorrect to me because it's like part of the performance. Like that's the only thing I can even think of, and it didn't like bother me at all.
You're just a dramatic king.
Dramatic. Like, and my wife who is butch read this and, you know, what like recognized themselves in it. So this isn't like, I think there are cases where butch women are like in literature or movies where butch women are like predators or you know, sort of like it's almost like they're men and like entitled the way men are. But that doesn't feel like this in this book, it just feels like part of the culture and part of the performance, which isn't to say that like everything that this character does is like good. She's like, I forget her name, but I
remember her stage name.
Yeah, she she's kind of like I believe she refers to the main character as China Doll at one point. Like she does experience racism within the community as well, but like
I see.
that tracks, and it's not just like the butch women doing that. So yeah, I thought it was it wasn't really a stereotype, it was a more like complex portrait of butch women and women who like presented male sometimes.
So Invisible Orientation doesn't really, it lists a lot, one whole chapter, I don't remember what it's called, but it's like the myths of asexuality. So it lays out a lot of the things of like the stereotypes of asexual people and like why they're wrong, or like what you can say if someone talks to you about those sorts of things. So that was helpful. And then I know I said in Iron Widow, one of the queer men is like his money and his general like, he's not, I would say flamboyant, and he's a little bit more on the like feminine side, and so like those are stereotypes like attributed to him. And like I said, I think I called him like a fancy boy or something like that. But he, even if he has those attributes of like that is how he was, I don't know, not socialized, but like that's how society sees him. Chiron goes out of their way to like they are more to than this like their flamboyancy. Oh, that's not a word. How they present.
I think it might be a word.
It's a word now.
I think we get the
how they
point.
present is just kind of like it is who they are. It is also how like society. It's how they survive in this society. But they also are the brains of this operation. They are the lone brain cell, you could argue, in this operation. So I've seen some, not just queer authors, but like a lot of Asian authors will talk about like, I've included some stereotypical attributes about this character, but I've also like, if you read the book instead of just focus on the back, like the back copy or what other people say about it, you'll see that they're a full person. Like, yes, Asian people are good at math and it is a bad stereotype, but sometimes just this character is good at math and they also have a whole very rich life story. So if you could focus on the whole picture instead of just like one or two things. And I think Chiron did that.
I see. Well, we're down to the last couple of questions. How can these books kind of inspire or influence future LGBTQ readers? Like how, like, would it be useful for them? Would they, how would it inspire them? Would it inspire them? I don't know.
Do you want to go first since your books are bummers?
Oh my God, you're right. I don't know why I came up with that question with these books that I chose.
I mean, I still think they're inspiring, but we can go on a happy scale.
Yeah, well, so On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous, so you can really see the resilience that little dog built throughout his experiences, from domestic abuse to borderline sexual abuse. He really toughened up from his experiences, and now he's a storyteller himself, and sharing his experiences to kind of inspire the next generation through his stories. So he does, you kind of learn through his journey too. And, without sharing too much, like I also really related to his journey and to his sexual awakening. And how you kind of like, you're not alone in rough experiences as a queer Asian immigrant. So I would say, for that specific demographic, like it's a good book to read if you're looking to be seen, or to be, to feel like you're not alone. Yeah.
Yeah.
And for My Policeman, how can this book influence the community or inspire the community? I guess it makes you a little more compassionate. You know, whether you're straight or you're gay, like it'll inspire you to really understand the community, and just really sympathize with their experiences. I think it's still, even though the ending is a bummer, you still learn a lot, because you get the perspective of the openly gay character Patrick, and then you get the perspective of Sylvie, the straight woman, and how, at the end Sylvie finally understands the whole, like, gay men liking each other, because at first she was like kind of like skeptical about it too, but they learn, and then you also learn by the end of the book. So yeah, they are good reads, but just prepare for your heart to be broken.
Good content warning there. I'll go next. So the inspiring influence, invisible orientation, again, it speaks for itself. It's really good for anyone who's just heard of asexuality or wants to know anything more about it. It's just the foundational text, I think, of it, so it's very inspiring, and it helps just answer a lot of questions, and it also helps you prepare to have the conversation with other people who've never heard of asexuality. So recommend that one highly. And then Iron Widow it's inspirational because it makes you want to burn everything to the ground, which I find very inspirational. Yeah. It's just a ball of rage, and it's really cathartic to read these characters go through what they do. And when there's a second one coming out, it's only going to be 2 of them. And I would nothing about their battle is easy, but they do come out on top. They come out,
Gotcha.
come out anyways. They are stronger in who they are, and they're stronger in their relationship with each other, which is really nice. And again, it's just really cathartic to read someone put into words just how angry you are all the time. So I loved Iron Widow for that. Yeah.
I see.
Like I said, I think Too Bright to See is sort of it felt to me, I obviously haven't read every trans middle grade book, but I have read a lot of them, and it definitely felt like a moment to me, because it's like using genre the way it does, and really sort of experimenting with that in a way that I think other books don't. So I think I see it as kind of the beginning of a broader range of trans books for kids. I hope it inspires more books like this, books also that are maybe trans ghost stories that aren't about being trans, and just, the main character happens to be trans, and the ghosts are a metaphor for something else. So I think it will continue to be good for kids to read, and it's also going to bring about a lot of other really good books for them to read.
Yeah.
And Last Night at the Telegraph Club also feels very different to me than a lot of other YA books, and it has this whole author's note at the end that might inspire people to read the book she read, to research, maybe go back and read books that were written during that time period, as well as seeking out maybe lesser known voices during that time period. And also, if it gets more people to read Melinda Lowe's books in the future, I'm all for that. Yeah.
I like that you two, so they're take place in the same time period.
Pretty much, yeah.
Which is pivotal time in queer history. But I like that you guys both chose historical books, because even though that YA is having a queer renaissance right now, not a lot of them take place before the 2000s.
Right.
At
Yeah,
this point
there
in
are some
time.
like really good YA historical fiction books, but I'm sure there are other ones, but at the moment I can't think of another one that features queer characters. So yeah.
Yeah, because queer people existed before,
Exactly.
before the thousands, and
Exactly.
these are the experiences that they had to go through.
Yeah. And I just realized these books, My Policeman and On Earth, were briefly gorgeous. They also tackle the concept of coming out.
Mm-hmm.
So in that aspect, that might, inspire future readers about, how to come out, or what are the consequences of coming out. Is it safe? What is, when is the right time?
Mm-hmm.
Especially for Ocean Vuong's book, it does tackle it in a way where you see the mother's reaction. And, the mother's reaction is pretty real in a way where I know people's mothers in real life who reacted the same way. So, and then it shows how he copes with that reaction. So, yeah, it tackles coming out too. So
That's gonna be an A24 miniseries. Did you see that?
Is it miniseries or a movie?
Oh, I don't remember which one. But
I don't know, but I know it's A24,
which is the only studio who could do that book justice. I'm very
Yes,
excited.
I'm an A24 stan. So when I heard that, I was like, yes, please.
I think I heard about it from you. I think you tweeted it.
Probably. I was like, I need a queer Asian film or miniseries because I don't remember. I can't think of one from the top of my head. So, but yeah, that's it. Yeah, thank you so much for coming to the Queer Book Talks and sharing these amazing books that I'm definitely going to put on my list. And thank you for bringing your thoughts onto the table, and they're very thoughtful, and hearing the content of the books that you brought. They're very diverse, and they're very, again, thoughtful. Like, you put some thought into, what books am I going to bring? Like, I'll bring this book because it's, not really talked about. And I appreciate that. But yeah, thank you, Liv and Lily.